Before installing the head, you want to make sure you have the head gasket oriented correctly. Sadly, I didn't have mine correct, and here's what happened. The arrow is showing the port that the oil was leaking from. It's because I installed the head gasket like this, when it should have been like this. So just to be clear, bad, good, bad, good. And once you've tightened down the head on the gasket, you can't just take it apart and flip it over. The gasket is ruined. You have to buy a new one. Before you place the head on the block, don't forget to install the dowel pins that were removed during assembly. They go into the holes highlighted below. With the head back in place, I'll insert the bolts and torque them down. Everything I've read says make sure that the bolt head and washers are free of debris and oiled, so I'll be dabbing oil on all of these. In this diagram, everything green is common to both the Magna and the VFR, and everything red is not. Bolt number 21 is not common, and you need to use the Magna bolt with the Magna head, even when it's on the VFR motor. There's two of those bolts used per head, and those are here and here. This is kind of funny. For the cylinder head bolts, the VFR service manual says tighten to 33 foot-pounds, and the Magna says to tighten them to 32 foot-pounds. This torque wrench is a Harbor Freight purchase from over 10 years ago. I mostly use it as a ratchet wrench. To check it, I bought a digital torque meter. It's nice. You can set a torque and it'll beep and flash red when you hit it. I also bought a 3/8 and 1/4 inch drive torque wrench, and its range is 20 to 200 inch-pounds, so it's for the smaller stuff. This one is rated at 5 to 80 foot-pounds. I also picked up extra batteries for the torque meter. This is the order that you tighten things down. Basically start in the center and crisscross outward. I'm just snugging them down with my regular ratchet, and I'll use my torque wrench when they get tight. Hey, all right. I went a little out of order here in that I didn't do bolts 9 and 10 till the end. And that head is on. When I removed the VFR head, I had put the crank in the T2 position just like the service manual says to, and I haven't touched it since. This put the arrow on the cam in line with the top edge of the head. And here's the picture I took right after I'd moved the crank to the T2 position, showing where the arrow is with respect to the edge of the head. So the first time I dropped the cam into my hybrid head, you can follow the arrow and see how I had it lined up to the edge, just like the picture. But after installing the cam retainers and tightening them down, the arrow disappeared inside the head, and the hole that was near the arrow is what was lined up to the edge. This meant the gear was a tooth or more off. So you actually have to set the cam in there so that the arrow is about a tooth up from the edge, so that when you tighten down the cam retainers, it ends up on the edge. You end up having to do this for all the cams in order for them to line up correctly. There is one more thing I did with regard to the cam retainers. This is a picture of the Magna head while it's on the Magna motor before I took the cam retainers off. It's oriented with the carburetor side towards the top of the page. There are actually markings where the red circles are. Though it's upside down, this one's marked AC. This one's marked BD. This one's also marked BD, and the last one's marked AC. Though I'm not sure how important it is, I wanted to make sure I put these back in the same place when I assembled the head. So I labeled them in the picture and printed it up for reference when I needed it. For the cam retainer bolts, the shop manual for both the VFR and the Magna recommend 12 Newton meters or 9 foot-pounds of torque, and they both have the same crisscross pattern for tightening down the bolts. After this, I installed the valve cover and moved on to the rear head. I did, however, have to repaint my valve cover. It had some corrosion and bubbling on it. I had this Rust-Oleum metallic brilliant metal finish laying around, and it ended up being an almost perfect match. I knocked the rough stuff off with a nylon wire wheel and my drill. Then I sanded it with 150 grit paper, and then moved to 600 grit wet sandpaper, and then I painted it. I think I did 3 or 4 coats, and then I let it dry for 3 days. And then I wet sanded it lightly again with the 600 grit paper, and then I polished it with Meguiar's polish. That's it for this video. The next one will be removing the rear heads and swapping the springs, and then reinstalling that head.